So it's my pleasure to introduce today Professor Christiane Schmullius and Dr. Jussi Baade. I've known both of them for a number of years now. They both from university in Germany, but in a sense they probably sort of honorary South Africans at this stage. I think at least Jussi's been coming here regularly for about 15 years or so, and they typically travel more of the country than most of us do in a year. So they've really been around the country, but I'm not going to say where they've been mostly because I know they will be doing that in their presentations. Jussi, are you kicking off first? The idea of the program today, I think both Jussi and Chris will have about 30 minutes for their presentation, but the idea is we've got a unique set of people here. It's not often we get the degradation people together in one room. So let's make lots of time for actually chatting about things, discussion. So don't go over with your presentations. Let's give time to talk. And then we do have some finger lunch stuff outside as well. So, people hang around, grab anybody you want to chat to after the meeting. That's the whole idea of putting a bit of lunch there for you. Jussi, I think it's over to you.
All right, thank you, Graham. Thank you, Colleen, for the invite. It's really a privilege to be here and present some of our findings concerning our South African land degradation monitor at a place where, for example, this map was produced, which impressed us very much in our work, where we as well were so much impressed about the digital data which different institutions, among others SALDi, provides free of charge. It was one of the bases for our formation of this project. And if where other people like Tim has been working for ages on it, the background is this Spaces 2 project, the Science Partnership for the Adaptation to Complex Earth System Processes in Southern Africa. It was a combined research approach from the German Ministry of Education and Research and South African government. It was very imbalanced funding, a lot of funding for Germany and only little funding on the South African side, which was a little bit of a problem, as at least partly concerning collaboration as well. So some partners with whom we formed this project then stepped back because they did not get any funding. I would first of all introduce to you shortly to the SALDi team, which was made up of 4 German partners, ourselves, the University of Jena. Where does we go? Where do we go back here? Give a different key page. That one. University of Jena, University of Tübingen, of Augsburg, and then the German Space Agency as well. And on the South African side, there was ARC, especially at the beginning, sandparks, because in every of our study areas we had 16 areas to give us background for land. The surface dynamics, CSIR was with us in the beginning. The same University of Stellenbosch and University of the Free State. Then here that is Equispectives, the South African company who did socio-economic work. And these were the fields we looked at. So the coordination was actually my biggest part, but I was as well engaged in looking at soil erosion. A colleague from Tübingen looked at long-term geological erosion over something like 100,000 years. Chris was engaged in radar remote sensing, and the German Space Agency in optical data remote sensing, both based on the Sentinel data, which is available since a few years. And we had the group from Augsburg who did land atmosphere modeling, hydrological modeling. We will Or the outline of today's talk is basically following this introductions. We present findings concerning soil erosion assessment. That's my part, and then Chris will take over and present land surface dynamics based on Earth observation data, some fascinating animations as well. Well, the rationale to look at land degradation in South Africa comes basically from pictures like this. I'm a geomorphologist, and I have to say, this is just beautiful gully erosion. Yeah, but on the other side, we all know that land degradation deteriorates ecosystem functioning. I mean, these are areas where it's even difficult to herd animals to raise them and produce proper meat. So land degradation is a big problem. It's a wide problem. Yeah, it's not only soil erosion, but in any research project, you have to focus on aspects. And so we really focused only on soil erosion and then on other processes concerned or adapted with vegetation. We selected 6 study sites across South Africa, starting here at the Western Cape, Overberg area, then to the very dry Kaiga area, including the Ograbis Falls National Park, then in the center, including Kimberley, Swolplaatje, with Mokala National Park and Benfontein Nature Reserve. Then number 4 is Bansopa, including Ladybrand, Wepener, at the border of Lesotho, Ponjanala Platinum in the north, was the 5th site, and then the 6th site is Ehlanseni, covering the southern part of Kruger Park, to have a rather huge area with so-called pristine surfaces. We selected these 6 sites to somehow represent the strong climatic gradient in South Africa, because we were convinced that if we would just work on one site, there's only little arguments to somehow expand these or extrapolate these findings to other areas in South Africa. The areas were as well, and this is based on this, I think, wonderful South African National Land Cover Map of 2020. The sites are, due to the climatic conditions as well, characterized by very different land cover and land use ensemblages. So in Overberg we have roughly 50% of arable land use, and in Ehlanseni, but that's as well due to the high percentage of Kruger Park portion in this area. There's something like 75% of forested land. We are very aware that during a short research project of about 3 years, there is the other aspect of the temporal extrapolation. Yeah, this is the 110 years precipitation data from Overberg, 5 years moving averages, and wherever your research period falls in this variable rainfall pattern, yeah, the results could be very different. Yeah, so that's certainly an aspect one needs to just keep in mind if one draws general conclusions from results. So now I would like to come to the soil erosion works shortly, a slide on the methods, and then I will present results concerning soil formation rates in South Africa, soil loss rates, and some remarks on soil management and conservation. For the soil erosion assessment, we used different methods. Over 2 field seasons, we had a rainfall simulator here in South Africa and did some nice rainfall simulation experiments gully erosion was basically surveyed based on UAV work. Then we looked as well in the areas where we have reservoirs at reservoir siltation using echo sounder surveys and as well terrestrial laser scanning. The colleague from Tübingen, he used cosmogenic nucleates to determine long-term soil loss rates, and then I mentioned that we had a small group working as well on the socio-economic aspects of land degradation in two sites, that was in Mansopa and in Ehlanseni. Coming to long-term erosion rates, which are, if you assume that the system is in steady state, similar to long-term soil formation rates. Yeah, the weathering and the lowering of the surface goes hand in hand. And based on our results and all the other cosmogenic nucleate data which were produced for South Africa, the colleague Christoph Glotzbach came up with a mean lowering rate of 5 millimeters in 1,000 years. And if you convert that to what is usually used when we talk about soil loss, then we come up with something like 0.15 tons per hectare and year soil formation. And this value is certainly much lower than what is often called the tolerable soil loss, 5 to 10 tons per hectare. So that one needs to keep in mind as a background data. Interestingly, before I did SALDi, I did a soil erosion measurement project in the Kruger Park by looking at the siltation of the reservoirs there. And there I came up with a erosion rate of 0.2 tons per hectare and year over a period of the last 50 years, roughly, in this, let's say, pristine area, which has never experienced European-like arable farming. So the soil is not disturbed like in many other places. Now let's go to the soil erosion assessment. At the beginning of this century, around the year 2000, final publication then 2008, the ARC and especially J. LaRue, who is now at the University of the Free State, did a nationwide RUSLE, so revised Universal Soil Loss Aggravation soil loss assessment, which assesses inter-rill and rill erosion. It doesn't cover gully erosion, yeah, but it looks at this this type of water erosion. And well, we know each other basically since that time, and so he provided us with his results from that time, and we within SALDi used newer available data to recalculate the results. And this shows you the results for the overback area, same color scaling for the two versions. His previous assessment was about 16 tons per hectare for the overback region. Our new assessment is only 1.3 tons per hectare. Now, they don't worry about that. Don't worry, don't worry. So, I mean, we have something like an order of magnitude difference. Yeah, and now certainly the question is there some kind of indication which of these two results are the correct ones? And I mentioned that we looked at reservoir siltation, and yeah, you saw the white and the pinkish borders in the picture before that. These are the reservoirs where we looked at the reservoir siltation, basically based on the data of the Department of Water and Sanitation. They do regularly, every 20 years, surveys of the reservoirs, and so one could calculate there the mean soil loss, or let's say sedimentation, from soil erosion in these reservoirs, and that is for these 4 reservoirs, it's around 1 ton per hectare and year. Yeah, our result is as well in the order of 1 ton per hectare and year. The old figures, the old assessment by Leroux and others is 26 tons per hectare. I mean, reservoir siltation is not identical with soil loss. Yeah, but I think, well, the closeness in order of magnitudes indicates that the updated SALDi RUSLE assessment is most probably more correct than the earlier one. So that is basically, I think, a good news. And if we look at all our 6 sites and just have a look here at the mean value, the mean value is the Roos assessment, ARC assessment was 10 tons per hectare, the new one is 2 tons per hectare. There's some variability between the sites, which is an result of the different land use patterns and this kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, this is highlighting that this approach to look at different sites in South Africa was really worthwhile doing it. Yeah, let's have a look at the results of our rainfall simulations. I know there has been rainfall simulations in South Africa done some decades ago, but obviously not so much in the past years. So that was one of the motivations to bring down an instrument like this. And we did rain always with 40 millimeters an hour, a plot of 1 by 2 meters. And these are results here from a degraded site. And this one here is from conservation tillage areas. And it shows you the infiltration with time. Yeah? And as long as this is a straight line, the infiltration is as high as our rainfall rate. And only if the infiltration goes down, then slowly surface runoff is created. And at the same time, with surface runoff, there's some soil removed, eroded. And here the last example here is actually no-till management for 7 years. And here we were able to, or needed to rain on it for 18 minutes, with this 40 millimeters per hour prior to the start of runoff. And the sediment concentration on that one was very, very low. Yeah, so this, I mean, this is just point data, point findings, but it indicates that there is certainly as well in soil management still some kind of potential to even reduce runoff and soil loss. On the other hand, here, that is the degraded site where we have these gullies. It's duplex soils. Yeah, it's the worst thing you can have in South Africa. And here we were able to create runoff within a few minutes, which certainly makes the experiment much shorter in time. Gully erosion, just short views on that, because for gully erosion, we basically have as well only point impressions or point data. I mean, J. Leroux had provided a map on gully erosion all over South Africa based on spot imagery, I think 10 years ago, something like that. And there's certainly as well the potential to redo it with now much better resolution remote sensing data. Yeah, gullies are really a complicated thing. Here, an example of a failed gully restoration measure, a failed gabion in close to Umtata in Eastern Cape. On the other hand, at the Lady Brand catchment, where land care is trying to work out how to stabilize gullies, there is a nice well-designed and working example of a gabion. There, where they were actually able to create a pond, which meanwhile is filled with sediment, and so it provides a stable base for the erosion. So there's no more incision of the gullies, at least at the lower end. We still have to look at what's happening upslope. Yeah. And another observation here. These runoff bounds, this is from the Mansupa area, but I've seen them in many places in South Africa. And this year we as well saw that these are still maintained. And that is really good news, yeah, because this certainly helps to reduce soil erosion and to conserve the soils. So summarizing, we found that soil formation rates are well below tolerable soil loss values. That's not such a nice news, but one just needs to be aware of this fact. On the other hand, we found lower soil loss rates than previously assessed. Yeah, 1/5 over all our areas. Partly, it's really an order of magnitude smaller. And the observations just show that there is obviously widespread application and maintenance of soil conservation measures, indicating that a lot of farmers are concerned about soil loss. And I think that is a very important base for any kind of conservation measures. I'd like to acknowledge that was a photo from the opening of the project in Pretoria in March 2019. All our collaborators and certainly the ministry for funding this project, and thank you for your attention. I'm open for questions. Yeah, right. Okay, the first question is the similarity of the soil loss assessments in the one side, that is Kaigari, that is the desert. And I think that's the reason. So the USLE works with factors, and one of this is the cover factor. And it seems that J. LaRue's approach used MODIS 500-meter vegetation index to somehow approximate the cover factor, comes to similar results like we used the South African national land cover data with 20-meter resolution, and we assigned C values to land use classes. So, and obviously in this desert rangeland area, bare ground area, we come up with the same results. That was the first question. The second question is where we looked at soil erosion and where we did our experiments. We were more active in commercial farmer land because I mean our socio-economic group worked in communal areas at good connections there, but for us, as we could not time our stays in the field at the same time, so we would not have this, let's say, entrance to these communal areas. Although the no-till experiment was on a small farmer's holding, who is actually as well somehow doing advisements to other small-scale farmers, trying to convince them that no-till is not only good for the soil, it's as well good for the pocket of the farmers, because they don't need to invest money into machinery, fuel, and this kind of stuff.
Thanks. So you mentioned that there's a change in the methodology, and then there's also little methods, and then there's this time. So I'm assuming the first study was done with data from around 2000, and yours was for 2020. You know, so obviously very hard to unpick the difference, how much of the difference is due to the method change and how much of the difference is, do you think any change is potentially due to lower rates of erosion in those landscapes over the last 20 years? Or does that seem to be far more likely that it's the methods that are pointing to degree activity.
So the question is about the differences between the former assessment and the newer assessment, whether it's method or whether it would reflect changes in land use or maybe in erosivity of the rainfall. I'm very much convinced that it's basically an outcome of higher resolution data. Yeah, it starts with a slope, yeah, representing a slope. Jaderu used SRTM 90 meter. We used 30 meter, the new, well, it comes from Tandem X, but it's Copernicus. They sell it. I mean, they don't sell it, they give it out for free, yeah? And because one thing is that you're not supposed to calculate sheet and drill erosion on slopes higher than, steeper than 50%. And only if you have a high resolution digital elevation model, you can identify these areas. And so if you have a 90 meter model, the slope is below the threshold, but with steep slopes, you always get very high values. So, I mean, that is actually in Overberg. One can see that very nicely because the area. Okay, the question is about wind erosion. RUSLE is not able to do wind erosion. Yeah? So that's a factor which needs to be looked at separately. There is a group within the Spaces project who did an assessment of wind erosion. In another Spaces project, it is, or we will publish it in the Spaces book, yeah, because they contributed to it. I'm personally not so convinced about their results because, interestingly, they show more wind erosion in the arid northwest, and the Free State, for example, according to the map, has no problems with wind erosion, while I think everyone knows that if you want to look for wind erosion, you go to the Free State. Yeah. So no-till is really the way to go if you want to increase infiltration, if you want to increase recharge of groundwater, or for the farmers to increase the volume of water in the soil for the plants to use it later on. So yeah, and reduce soil water. But these kind of no-till management things, they have as well their down draws. Usually people think that these areas are not as productive as some kind of conservation tillage areas. So that needs negotiation with the farmers, I guess. Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for your interest and questions. It's always good to have this feedback, and I think now Chris.
Apparently the people trying to get in. I'm not sure how to
Okay.
the name. Thank you all very much. We are really honored such a large audience here and the time on a Monday morning. Well, I have been leading the remote sensing sub-project of the SALDi project. And this meant, for those who know me, maybe I'm a radar nerd. So radar remote sensing is really what I live for, almost besides my husband, maybe. Also in the project, we had the optical remote sensing rather being processed by the DLR, the German Aerospace Center. But now things are coming together, and so my talk will be a very fast journey through applications and through sites. So at the end of this journey, what I would hope is that if you are interested, or you have colleagues or students who are interested in these sites, that we can possibly cooperate. What we have established are data cubes, and we will update the data cubes for the next 3 years, that's certain. And all what we produce needs validation, interaction with local knowledge, with local experts. So we do have stakeholders, but we want to extend this. And since remote sensing will live by color, I thought what I do is, if I have some animations, then I will just so this is running too, when you get a piece of expression on your color. Yeah. And then Graham has the presentation also. Okay, so well, how did we approach land degradation? Well, we started out with a publication by Graham in 2019 on the aspects that should be monitored in South Africa, and that's what you see here: rangeland degradation, bush encroachment, degradation of croplands, vegetation cover change, and alien species. But that was too, let's say, high geometric level, so we did not approach the alien species. Now, looking at remote sensing, I mean, these are words that cannot be easily. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Apparently, I'm not sharing the right. Oh, you're too. Okay, sorry. So sorry. So, well, I can continue with the explanation. I mean, that what remote sensing can map is something different than what may be the observable that is defined by a human being as that this is important about the land surface. So there has to be some translation between what we can actually map, for example, bare area coverage, or we can map tree covers, bush encroachment, or slung-boss encroachment. But then again, it's not the slung-boss that we see; it's a certain structure on the surface that we can map. And so we have this diagram that tries to relate between the observables from remote sensing and what Graham has been, of course, with the core authors, been describing. So at the input data that we are using, that's important to know, is the Sentinel-1 and 2 radar and optical satellite, and obviously all the higher level products you can produce. Many of you may be familiar with optical products like NDVI or EVI. There's, in our data cube, there's I think about 12 such optical products, but we also have similar products from radar, for example, coherence, and here's not the time to explain what it is, but it's an interferometric parameter that is very sensitive to surface structure. And then, of course, multi-temporal statistics. But we also have other data. CHIRPS is a global precipitation product, especially for radar. We need to know what has been the precipitation impacts. We are using JEDI, a laser on the ISS, to train our models for vegetation height and vegetation structure, and then, of course, the Copernicus stem. So eventually, so these are all the derived products, multi-temporal, so time series products from the optical data as well, actually, as from the radar. But radar, again, gives an insight into water and in the surface. So we have a product on vegetation structure and on surface moisture. And then finally, and this is, I mean, we are officially at the end of the funding period of our SALDi project in April, but we are really just in the middle of bringing things together from optical and radar data. And we are at a very exciting point in time. So unfortunately, we are at the university, so we can use our master students to work with us on the data cubes. And this is where I would like to invite you and spread the news. But I mean, our abstraction are the 6 sites. Okay. I want to show this slide because I don't know whether everybody is aware that since only, let's say 2018, when Sentinel-1 and especially Sentinel-2 was operational, it's only like 4 years that we have reached a new era in remote sensing. We have optical data bi-weekly. We have radar data weekly. And this is for South Africa. In Germany, we have every 3 days, because of the latitude and overlap, we have radar data. So we are in a total different world now on exploring time series. And that's really important to to remember that also we are in a better geometric resolution. Yeah, Landsat had 30, Sentinel has 10-meter resolution. So we are really in a time of big data now, and what is also important, this European Copernicus program is guaranteed until 2040. So whatever we do now is also valid for the upcoming years, which is of course also great. And this is just a 4-slide. I don't know whether everybody is so familiar with remote sensing. Well, optical data obviously looks at the optical wavelengths, looking at reflectances from the sun, but also in the near and middle infrared range. And so what you measure with optical data is related on reflectances, for example, from vegetation. Now with the radar data, we are independent from sun. We are using very long wavelengths, Sentinel-1, A and B, and the wavelengths we are looking at is especially the 5 centimeters. So it's long wavelengths. And this is what this little graph should show you, is that with radar, we always have a penetration into the canopy or a penetration into the soil a little bit. Now, who has a microwave in your kitchen? Who has a microwave in your kitchen? Yeah, a few people. Do you know why your food gets warm in the microwave? But this is not really the right term. It's not heating up the water molecules. Why? Energy. Yeah, and actually you can look up in your instructions of your microwave. You probably have a wavelength of maybe 6, 7, or 8 centimeters. S-band is usually used in the kitchen microwave. So it is very similar to the wavelength we are using from space. Yeah, so what the radar does, or the microwave impulse, it brings the water molecules into rotation. And this rotational energy is then being transformed into your fiber, and it's giving you the impression it's warm, and it is warm. So actually the satellites, I mean, they have about the same power like your microwave in your kitchen. So there is really not much reaching the surface. So don't be afraid that things are getting nuked or so. This is not the case. But it's just to remind you, the principle is simple. Radar interacts with water molecules. So if you have a 5 centimeter wavelength, you penetrate the vegetation. Everywhere where there is a water molecule, the radar pulse is being backscattered, as we call it. And then L-band would be, of course, much nicer with a longer wavelength, more penetration depth. And starting next year, the NASA sensor will be up in space. The Japanese are flying L-band, but it's commercial, unfortunately. But next year, another great story on radar starts. So we are putting all these data sets together in an open data cube. So Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, all the products. And then what we have to do is, of course, analyze these time series. And I show you a few results, but it's really just on the surface of what we can do. Because the data cube is only ready about a year now, or 1.5 years. And actually, the Sentinel-1 and the Sentinel-2 data we are using come from South Africa, from Digital Earth Africa. So you have in your country a nice resource to work with such data. We are using Jupyter notebooks programmed in Python. We have a full set of Jupyter notebooks available now. And just in our last semester, we took our master course, 16 students. Some of them never had programmed in Python. And within a month, they were able to process these hundreds of satellite data and more or less understanding what they're doing. I was very much amazed because my master thesis was 2 Landsat images. 2 Landsat images, yeah. And these guys get to the data cube and work with hundreds of radar, hundreds of optical data. That's why I say it's a new era that enables us to do a lot. Okay. So now I will go with a little tour, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 through the 6 sites. And actually, the PowerPoints are sitting here on your laptop, and please distribute it, use them, just reference us, to be friendly. And if you look at the land surface processes, I mean, eventually it all boils down to vegetation cover change, of course, well, caused by fire or by drought. Then, of course, encroachment of bush or tree losses. So it's always what we map is a surface feature that is, in the end, it's similar for the different areas, but it has different meanings for land degradation. And I'm starting with Overberg with a site number 1. And this is a result of the students looking into a bare soil index from Sentinel-2 from the optical data, and then comparing it with NDVI data. And again, I'm just throwing at you a result. And I think this is where, this is not coming that bad. It shows per year the frequency of bare soil pixels. So for 2018, this is the Overberg region, here's Cape Agulhas. Oh yeah, and they only looked into those pixels that belong to a land cover class, pasture or agricultural crops. Yeah, this is why you have some white areas that are masked out, because we were interested what's happening on those vegetation pixels. And I think this is a nice product by itself. Again, we're bringing it perhaps together with erosion modeling, that you can actually monitor now with a relatively simple system how often a pixel, a 10 by 10 meter pixel, was bare soil and no vegetation on it per year. Yeah, so this would be the yearly results. But of course, you can also look now into more in depth. This is the Nuvias wetland special management area near Agulhas, where we have deployed actually near that airstrip close to the black oyster catcher vineyard and Western, maybe some of you know it. We have in each of our sites, we deployed a soil moisture instrument, because with radar, we need to have that reference. How did the soil moisture change? So this is why we have been looking at this Nuvias region. And now again, looking into only the 2 land cover classes from the South African National Land Cover, pasture and crops. We can now start to explore the time series. And they look, of course, now there's all kinds of scattering here. Up here you see those bars. You see my eyes. That's the precipitation here. In this case, it's from 2 stations here at the Moderfly and Sertendalsfly. So these are real measurements. And you can see now what is important. The black line, this black line is our in situ data. Sometimes the instrument was flooded, we had to repair it, so this is the breaks in the line, but this is our reference. And now what we are interested in, because there are global soil moisture products available. There is a CCI soil moisture from ESA, the Climate Change Initiative soil moisture product, that is being used in models, in hydrological and climate models. And I was always a bit in doubt of that, because with a 5 centimeter wavelength, you do not really penetrate a thick vegetation. So this was one of the scientific questions we had. How valid is that soil moisture product? And here you see the pink line, that is this, here it's more rather purple. That is the global product. And it is not really reflecting what is happening with respect to changing in situ soil moisture. So we are seeing, which is obvious, but it needs all these reference data and research, how valid is such a global product. And we have been developing a product ourselves. It's from the Sentinel-1 moisture, and these are the lines now for 2 different classes that look here more like this brownish color here on your screen. Yeah, and they do follow these precipitation events much more, but they also reflect the growth of vegetation, which is then these points that you see here. This is the NDVI development. So what this means from this complicated graph is, if you want to produce a surface moisture product from radar data, what many people would need and love to have, you have to be very well informed about the vegetation structure and the vegetation status. So, and this is where optical and radar comes together. Yeah? Where I can use an NDVI or an EVI product and bring it together with the radar data. Okay, then let's move on for the site number 2. Oh well, then maybe let's. Can you look at the color? Where am I now? Oh, yeah. That is one on the middle screen. I can also look it here. Okay, now this is near Kakamas, or Kakamas, I think is how you pronounce it. There, and you see the changes in these well, irrigated areas in the Oranje River floodplain, but also outside, where all these grape fields have been extended or are being used. So this is an EVI product from the Sentinel-2 satellite, and it goes from 2018 to 21. So let's see, there's not much magic behind it, except that you could now map when and where the vegetation activity is highest. You could use this also to calculate the water that is being used to produce the grapes. But there is also now looking at the radar image. This is the Sentinel-1 over those 4 years. And you see different phenomena. Of course, you see also the fields, because there's a lot of water in the fields. But you also see all the little drainage systems very nicely that you didn't see that well on the NDVI or EVI rather product. So you're getting information about the vegetation in the little stream channels. And again, bringing now the information together of the surface features as a vegetation form and as a water content, you get the, let's say, the complete picture of that surface. But what is also interesting is to compare what we are doing since 2018 with this wonderful web portal developed by Sander Venter, and where one of the authors sits here, Jim Hoffman. And we have been using this to show the changes of the 40 years before. And this would be the same area now again. The one point you can choose in that web portal a certain point and look at it, what happened over the last 40 years. I think it's just really magnificent information. You can also look then in a specific year if you're interested in it. But what you see here now is a map of where the land use has changed over the last 40 years, and all these new grape fields that have been developed. Now you can look into one of these new fields, and you can even identify exactly the year when a new irrigated field has been developed, and also the yearly changes of vegetation and harvest, etc. So, but this web portal stops at 2018. And again, we can then continue with the Sentinel-2 as we've done here, creation of time series or creation of change maps using Sentinel-1 and 2. And okay, there's another one of these curves that may be a little bit more self-explanatory. You have in these dots are the NDVI. Then this blue line is our surface moisture index from Sentinel-1. And you see things go together. Of course, radar increases when vegetation increases, but it is much more sensitive to individual precipitation events, and I will get to that also later once more. And here we have SMAP, a soil moisture active passive product from NASA, also a global soil, they call it soil moisture product, but you see it has 10 by 10 kilometers resolution. But we actually see that this NASA product is a bit more sensitive to a changing soil moisture than this CCI product. But again, all of this can only be verified with local in situ data. And this would be now zooming into this irrigation area in Kakamas.
On the left hand, you see a Sentinel-2 EVI change over the 4 years. And here you see a surface moisture change using the Sentinel-1, the surface moisture product that we have been developing. So you can bring together now vegetation development and moisture development. Okay, let me move on because time is running here. So the next site is the one at Mokala National Park and Benfontein Nature Reserve. And we also have three DAAD students. Hilma and Dialba is one of them, doing her PhD on an approach. We'll see where it goes. We call it, some of you may be familiar with spectral unmixing, using optical information to unmix whether you have grasses or bushes or trees in a pixel. Very nice approach. And we want to try to apply this to radar data now. To a radar unmixing approach, because we know we are seeing the vegetation volume. So there must be a possibility to look again also in how much of a pixel is grass, bushes, or trees. And just to show you the this is again I should. Yeah, this is a map. It's a multi-temporal coherence mean. So that the coherence is again an interferometric product looking at 2 radar acquisition dates, but now looking at whether something on the structure has changed. So the higher the coherence, the less vegetation volume. The higher the coherence, say the clearer that surface. The lower the coherence, the more things scatter in that pixel, and they bring the coherence down. So coherence stands for the correlation of the radar signals. And you can see that nice, but there is so much detail in just this one map that we said, okay, let's look into, and I really love this graph, and I'll show you. I call it the dancing pixels. Because what you see here is 2 radar parameters. We talk in polarizations, VV and VH, and the color gives you the coherence. And this is now just some pixels from Benfontein. No, sorry, from Mokala. From Mokala National Park, starting at this time in 2015. It goes all the way, no, 18 to 21. It's only grassland. It's only grassland pixels. And what I like about this graph is it shows you using these, if you watch it long enough, it's a bit hypnotic. Yeah, then you see there is this dynamic of coherence going up, getting yellow, and you have low backscatter. Then this cloud jumps up, but you see also different movements. Yeah, there are some clusters that come in later, or they jump up more in the vertical direction, or others that go in this cross-polarization, this direction. So you see that dynamic of pure grassland pixels that contain information about possibly some species mapping. Because it stands for water volume and for the structure. And then, well, if there's a radar scientist here or somebody who knows radar, you know what this is, this single pixel that's dancing up here by itself all the time. We have any radar expert here? I mean, you see it has high coherence and it has high backscatter. And it stays very stable all the time here. That's actually one of the buildings in the park. So it's like a permanent persistent scatterer. It's moving a little bit, but it's always doing its own dancing up here. But what this animation shows how much information is contained in, I mean, principally quite ugly radar data. So now with the time series, we can do something. And here for Mokala, this is the western grassland part. We then went through some principal components, and we can apply all kinds of image processing and on the data sets now that you have this wonderful time series. And then coming up with different clusters. This would be then a result of those dancing pixels, clustering them now spatially and talking to a Brazilian house in Kimberley. I mean, this makes sense with respect to vegetation classes. But well, this is a PhD of Nangula. So site number 3, site number 4, Free State province, and this is here where we worked with Tunis Morgenthal from the Department of Agriculture on slangboss mapping. And again, I'm rushing through slangboss. You see with your eyes, it has a different structure than the grassland. So as a radar scientist, it just calls me, yeah, you can map me. And this is what we've done again with radar backscatter, but including also this coherence. And now, again, as a radar nerd, this really makes me happy and curious, because this is textbook-like how the backscatter and the coherence behaves. If the volume is growing and more water, the backscatter goes up and the coherence goes down. So it should be a line that is counter-swinging all the time. But there are some years when this is not happening. When suddenly the maximum of the coherence is close to the maximum of the backscatter. So now this is where we have to look into detail. Why is this happening? What's the cause? But in any case, we could apply a little regression model then to map where, when, with this color scheme, slangboss occurred on the sites, and it was validated by the local land care teams. Site 4. Now we move to site 5. That is southwest of Pilanesberg. There we had there is a biosphere reserve fairly new since 4 years. This is again the national land cover data set, and I'm showing you this because here we have explored the surface moisture index that we developed with the precipitation and Sentinel-2, etc. And we come up now with, over those 4 years, only change. Like this is the EVI change. And there are subtle differences. Well, I mean, up to 15% EVI increase over those 4 years. But this is not a miracle. If you talk to the people, the precipitation has increased over the last 4 years coming out of a drought. So it's no wonder. But you can now determine it on the ground. And the same for the surfing index. This is the surface moisture index from radar, and again you see there is an increase here, especially towards the east, and it relates to the increased precipitation. Again, well, on Google Earth there are 6 places on our planet now where we have our soil moisture site. This is in this area. In the middle is the logger, and it's in the 8 directions, 10-meter trenches where we had the sensors. So it's actually 8 sensors that the logger is calculating. And yeah, then you get graphs like this. Now the soil moisture here is this purple, these peaks you see here, and then you see nicely how the bare soil index increases. That's the brown, and the green is the soil moisture index. The surface moisture index that we developed, and it follows it. So then you come up with correlations like this for that specific site. But then you still have to know a lot about, is that surface homogeneous? What's the dynamics? And with this, I come to the last site, Grüner National Park and surroundings, because there we learned after we learned the lesson, we understood it's obvious, but first we were very puzzled, and that's why it's so important to work with the local experts and have observations in the field, what is happening to your signals. Now this is just to show that you can do with Jedi LiDAR, develop models for Sentinel-1 and for Sentinel-2 on woody cover, produce some woody cover maps, hopefully with, of course, the error estimates involved, and you can try to look into woody cover change. You see pretty much straightforward applications of radar remote sensing or optical remote sensing. Yeah, I mean, this is, I just jump over this because I want to come to these surface moisture maps that we now producing, because radar we have it weekly. You get a weekly surface moisture map. Colors are a bit more distinguishable. And the idea of the surface moisture map is that you discriminate between a vegetation phenology that is influencing your signal and short-term changes due to precipitation and changing soil moisture. I'm also including more maps. So now this is our soil moisture site at Lower SALDi in Kruger National Park. Also some gaps in between because of flooding, and I think twice flooding actually now. We have a different, right? So these are for us very, very valuable time series, temperature, and especially the soil moisture. Now, what has happened in that site? Let's see, here. So here is the southern Kruger Park, southern border, Komati Port, Malilane, Lower SALDi is here. And, well, you guys, I mean, this you know probably much better than we do, the effect of very strong fires on the surface. So they destroy the vegetation fully. And now, when you think about, are we able to measure the soil moisture under these two conditions? You would think, yes, of course. Yeah, and even when the fire was there, it's even better to measure the soil moisture. But what we discovered is, now just looking at these two circles here, the brown line here, that's our in situ soil moisture. It goes up. And the other indices, they also go up with this soil moisture increase. But in this year, the soil moisture goes up. But all the indices, and we're looking at the CCI soil moisture again, and our Sentinel-1 soil moisture, they stay low. So they do not follow that increase of soil moisture triggered here. This is the precipitation from a nearby station. And the answer is this. What happens to the radar signal is when you have this is now a very smooth surface, and you get specular reflection away from the sensor. So if you have a condition like this, it's fully burned, you have the ash that's kind of given like a siltation of the surface. This is a very smooth surface, so the radar, and even especially if it's wet, it's just specular backscatter away from the sensor. So if you do not get a signal back, you cannot estimate the surface moisture. Now it is a very, very obvious phenomenon that happens, but without having the in situ soil moisture here, without having our Sun Parks project officer, Tertia Stridon in this case, telling us about the fire, we would be wondering what's happening with our model. So this is the end now of the of my presentation. Saying that what's next? What we need to do is bring together all these, also sometimes for like in situ deep learning. We have to bring in the local expertise. What are the features in that certain area that can influence the optical or the radar? But we have to adjust our thinking. And then we can come up with very nice new results. So we do have a lot of stakeholders in the different regions, but we have to be more interactive now in the coming 3 years. That's our wish, to learn even more, and DataCube is there for everybody to work with. So thanks for your attention. Yeah, so the question is what the benefit is of getting soil moisture information a week afterwards. I mean, principally, you do retrieve the Sentinel data 24 hours later, and having your model, you could implement and map. And just go back to this with the different maps. So you can produce such maps. It's not a week later, but I think that I mean also when you have many years, then you know what kind of surface conditions you need to have an optimal growth occurring on your fields. So the advantage of having such maps is that you have a spatial and a temporal information. I mean, you cannot get out of the problem that until you get the data, there will be time gone. But if you really want it as fast as possible, you could principally do this a day or 2 days after the acquisition. Well, this is Sentinel-1 has 10-meter resolution. So you could bring it down to 10 meter, but you usually resample to 20 by 20 meters. And what you can see here so nicely is, I mean, because the radar reacts to precipitation, these maps are actually a result also on the space, on the location of perhaps let's say a more defined precipitation event. Yeah, but just watching these acquisitions week by week by week, yeah, you get a spatial temporal pattern of precipitation. Did you want to add?
I just wanted to add something. I guess it's not such a valuable information for a single farmer, because a single farmer, it has instruments to adjust its irrigation speeds. Probably soil moisture amendments but it's an information for if you want to know what's happening in a larger region, let's say in a catchment area, the water board or something like that. I think on that level, there is remote sensing information.
Okay. Yeah. So your first question was, I remember about this. You talked about alien species and radar being useful. So let's say this way, that for alien species, if you can classify this into growth types, as you just did, yeah, bushes versus trees, yeah, then radar may help. But what we see in that PhD in Mokala and Benfontaine, discriminating with radar between bushes and trees is, it looks like there are some seasons where we may get to a discrimination, but it is very, very difficult. So we are now really analyzing each acquisition, and so if there is a leaf off situation, then we may be able to discriminate that. That is this PhD about the radar mixing idea. But versus grassland, or as this example with the slungbush, forbs, let's say, or woody forbs versus grassland, that is possible. But you have to use the coherence. You have to use coherence. Yeah, so that's that answer. Yeah. Yes. And did she have 2 other questions? Sorry. Yeah. I just want to, for the last question about the funding situation. I mean, the whole idea of Spaces program was that there is NRF funding from South Africa. And that didn't work out. Yeah. Yeah. So this is really not much we can do. What we could do is that Jussi enabled that there was German money going to the socio-economic company. So quite considerable amount of money to a South African company who did the socio-economic analysis. So that was very nice. And other than that, I mean, again, GAD PhD students to Germany, exchange on conferences, all that, or in kind. Yeah. Second question I forgot now. Yeah. About the day. Okay, there. I absolutely strongly believe that the more we understand about these time series, and this is where I'm special, and some people don't like me about this. I want to understand the signal on the pixel level. And this contradicts somehow all these machine learning or deep learning approaches that just throw everything in there and look what comes out. Yeah, so on the other hand, the data is so overwhelming that you can't do it really on a pixel level anymore. So we have to find, and there are ways now also to bring a biophysical model into a machine learning approach, so mix things or merge things, not mix, merge. So that's why I think data cubes, there's no other way than data cubes. No.
I wanted to ask about vegetation moisture content. What is the energy do that, and the conspiration, or the vapor compression fluxes from the data?
Yeah, that is, I like to answer, I'm the mapper. If you are the modeler, then we can bring things together. I can only try to estimate that volume, the water volume, as good as possible. Yeah, but then the evaporation experts, they have to say, what can they do with that information? Yeah, so I mean that's a part I have not worked in. But what we are doing in Germany, for example, where we look at ascending and descending orbits, one is acquiring data at 5 a.m. in the morning, the other one 5 p.m. in the evening. And we see the differences in the backscatter between the morning and the afternoon acquisition because of the water volume. But this is work just starting now to retrieve information about the water content of the vegetation by these diurnal differences.
So there's two things. One is the flux of the water, which would be the conservation of the signal elements, the sort of pools that stop in the
yeah.
Yeah. Is one something seems like the flux one would require maybe more modeling than the full one, and can provide a layer of intimate vegetation water content at this point?
Well, we haven't done it yet, but this cross-polarization signal, the VH, that stands directly for volume scattering. And the more water, the more volume scattering. And again, the time series would be this baseline for a model where you look at the driest condition and the most wet condition, and then you try to develop a regression model saying so much VH backscatter for a certain vegetation type that you still would have to do. Yeah, that stands for that water content. Yeah. There's one more.
I think this is really amazing timing in a way for us, because there's a real need to start bringing together the radar, what the radar data can bring, especially because we do the vegetation map, and then we're also trying to understand how the condition of the remaining natural bits of that vegetation, how they are changing over time. And it's very clear that this combination of the structural data you get from radar versus the various phenological and other data you get from an optical need to be better viewed. Right. But what's pretty clear is that don't leave that to amateurs. And I think it's often done really simply. And I think some of us have been maybe guilty of using the radar data like a little bit in an overly simple way. And like you say, that treating each picture with respect is really useful when you're starting. Speak to the people who understand that vegetation unit, understand the functional dynamics that are expected, and then the radar data and start to make about things. I think there's a lot more experience in optical data sets, and now bringing everyone using optical data for many years in quite ecologically intelligent ways, to now kind of make sure that happens with the radar data. It does feel like there's a real opportunity. So my question is, these data cubes obviously they're pretty big. And you've got these study sites that look like, about 80 km across. What would the approaches be for trying to deal with this sort of information at a national scale? So when, we want to do the whole country. So Tim and Brad and Colleen and various of us here, I'm thinking of trying to break the country up, obviously, from a biome perspective, because things are going to behave quite differently. You're going to have very different dynamics in your deserts and in rainbows and so on.
Absolutely,
You're
yeah.
going to be left with giant data sets. So they can be practical. Is it all going to have to work through Earth Engine? You know, it just sounds like we've got a bit of a technical challenge ahead of us trying to think nationally. Even if we broke the country up, we're still going to be challenged, I think, in how best to process the data to try and get national training for it. Do you think that's not such a big deal?
I mean, at the end, it's what is the computing facilities that you have? That is, yeah, because that drives the system. So, I mean, our student, we have 100 by 100 kilometer plots. And there they were, let's say, even for a high performance cluster that we have, they were too large for the students to produce meaningful results in a few hours. And so the students focused on even smaller sites within the 100 by 100 kilometers. That's what I say. I mean, it depends really on the, I don't know, whether Sansa, you know, has marvelous computing facilities. But then, I mean, using radar, one idea could be that you go for growth forms like traits, yeah, vegetational traits, and try to go away from the way you have described the surface. Think radar. Put your radar glasses on and say, okay, yeah, I have 5 centimeter wavelength, and what's the thing on the ground? How does it interact? And then do radar growth forms.
And would you be able to do a national, you know, would you be able to do a national average and national computation across multiple time points with the data? How big would the data sets have to be? You know, they would end up being so huge.
Well, I mean, these 6 sites, they have now 100 terabytes. The 6 sites.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not.
Which I mean,
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's really players like Google Earth, possibly Earth. They have a very different core, and there's a new player on the surface that is Esri. Yeah, Arc. They are building up their own image processing tools since a few years. They are including all radar data. We are in contact, and my feeling is they are not really on that kind of level of exploration. But if somebody has computing power, then it's Esri also. Yeah. No, I mean it's very, very interesting, and such things have been done with Landsat data. Yeah, so now I don't know how the status for global products is with Sentinel-2. I have not followed it up. Yeah, but again, radar it does need some understanding. But like this thing, I had disputes with my postdoc who did not want to look into coherence. Yeah, he said he's more an optical guy. I said, oh, radar, okay, we do the backscatter. And look in the coherence. Oh no, it doesn't make sense. And then we get these curves. Yeah, these are wonderful signals of surface structural changes. So it's in there, but you need to process it. Yeah.
Okay.